This is Mr. Magnifico, and in this part of the Franken-trike project I'm going to be adding bigger wheels. That means more suspension, more traction, more speed and more range. So let's go! Now the first and most obvious step is to dismantle the existing hoverboard wheel. After having removed the 6 Phillips head screws, the next step is to prise open the lid of the wheel. This can be done using a flathead screwdriver. The next step is to remove the rotor. I found it easier to place this on the ground and apply some weight to it, then give it a little wiggle and then pull it up. The next step was to remove the old solid tire. To do this, I placed it upside down on a can of paint and then gave it a little tap with a hammer. Okay, a few taps with a hammer. For the next step, I temporarily placed the lid back on the base and added a few screws. The reason for this is I'm going to make a slit in both the lid and the base for the nozzle of the tube, so I'd like them both to be in the same place. Whilst the slit for the nozzle can be made anywhere around the circumference, I like to keep it in between 2 screws. This not only looks better, but it also keeps the structural integrity intact. At this stage, I'm only going to use the grinder to mark where the nozzle is going to go. After making a mark on the lid and the base, it was time to separate them again. After removing the lid, it was time to make the slot in the base. This is where the nozzle is going to go, so it will be pretty deep, but I had to make sure that it did not reach the magnets. It also needed to be wide enough for the nozzle to fit in. I then repeated the same process for the slot in the lid. This slot needed to be large enough for the whole of the nozzle to fit through. It was also easier to do as there was no risk of damaging anything. The tire that I used for this project is a 4.1 by 3.5 by 5 inch. This means that the width of the tire is 4.1, the height of the walls is 3.5 inches and the diameter of the tire is 5 inches. It fits on a standard 3.25 inch rim. That being said, I did sand it down slightly to make the fitting easier. Applying a tad bit of grease to the tire also helped a great deal. and then it was just a matter of pushing the base of the motor into the tyre.
One eternity later.
After one side of the tyre was in, I needed to ensure this other side fit just as well. This also involved some pushing, but it did not take nearly as long as the first side. And once I got to this stage, I knew the tyre would fit perfectly. The next step was simply to tuck the tube into the tyre, making sure that the nozzle lines up with the slot in the base. With the tube inserted, it was harder to push down, but it was not impossible, and I had to keep pushing until the tyre wrapped around the rim. Admittedly, this is probably the hardest and most time-consuming part of the whole project. I learnt that using the lid at this stage was very handy, but before I could do that, I needed to put the rotor back. Using the lid not only helped push it down evenly, adding a few screws also stopped the tube from pushing the tyre back up. Once the tyre looked good, I replaced all the screws and pumped it up slightly. This was so that I could see if there were any abnormalities in the tyre and to make sure that it had fit perfectly. Once I was happy with it, I continued to pump it up to the recommended PSI. And with that, I had one large wheel for the Franken-trike. I just needed to repeat the same process for the second wheel. This is a comparison of the size difference between the old hoverboard wheel and the new improved larger wheel. And this is what the Franken-trike looks like with the larger wheels. These wheels made a great deal of difference to the Franken-trike. To begin with, because they are larger wheels, the back of the trike has lifted. This means the seat is now flat. It used to be at an angle, and at immediate acceleration it would flip backwards, but with these wheels this was no longer a problem. And secondly, because the tubes are air-filled, there is suspension added, which makes the ride a lot more comfortable. And thirdly, because the wheels are larger, they need to turn less to cover the same distance, which means they give more speed and more range. And of course, it's now time to see it in action. These wheels not only look great, but they performed a lot better than anticipated. They are not only useful for this project, but can be used for a variety of projects. So don't forget to subscribe to see what else we do with this. And as always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe.